Welcome to the Liberty Alert with Gregory Seltz, sponsored by our friends at the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty here in Washington, D.C., a program that cuts through the chaos and confusion in the culture today by talking two kingdom citizenship, bold biblical principles for a robust public Christian life. And now your host, Dr. Gregory Seltz.
Good day, Washington, D.C., and friends of the program all around the country. I'm Gregory Seltz. Welcome to the Liberty Alert, where every week we try to cut through the noise and take on the issues, especially the public issues that matter to people of faith. Today we're talking about the Supreme Court, and like we've always talked about on this program, the Supreme Court maintaining that the court's individual nature versus the executive branch versus the legislative branch. I mean, these are keys to our freedom. And of course, with the retirement of Stephen Breyer, this is now back in the news. And we're going to be talking about his replacement potentially. But to do that, we are privileged to have probably the expert on these kinds of things in the field, talking about Supreme Court stuff, nomination process, Carrie Severino, who's the head of the Judicial Crisis Network, but also best-selling author of a book that I think everyone should read, Justice on Trial, the Kavanaugh hearings. Carrie, it's great to have you with us today.
Thanks. It's so great to be here.
And Tim Goeglein, VP of External and Government Relations for Focus on the Family. He's been a good friend to us at the LCRL, and he's here to talk about this process and what it means for our country as well. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
All right, Carrie, I'm going to start with you. You have seen this process, this nomination process from the inside many, many times. My struggle, and I think maybe the struggle with a lot of our listeners, is anytime we talk about the Supreme Court nomination process, the narrative is usually liberal versus conservative, or representation, a representation of the electorate, et cetera, et cetera. And it's not what I think it should be, a constitutional judge versus an activist judge. I think Dred Scott was an activist ruling. I think Roe v. Wade was an activist ruling. Am I missing something? How come we can't seem to get a hold of the narrative, do you think?
Well, I think the good news is, as we can see by the current makeup in the court, there actually has been a lot of success in the conservative movement in terms of understanding that narrative. When you think back, now many decades, but some of the worst chief justices in the history of our country, like Earl Warren, were nominated by Republican politicians.
Right.
Didn't even, Blackmun, who wrote Roe v. Wade, right? They weren't even beginning to think about looking at the kinds of things they should be looking in judges. It was seen as a political chit that they were trading for something else, or, just not this is a historic generational impact they're going to have on the Constitution. That changed and really started to change with Ronald Reagan. And now I feel like with the growth of the Federalist Society, which has trained a whole new generation and now multiple generations of lawyers in this understanding of the Constitution, how we read it in a faithful manner, and then really in messaging that and explaining that to the American people, I think most Americans actually do want to see judges who are going to be faithful to the Constitution and the rule of law. The tragedy here is that only one of our political parties recognizes that, even though I really think a lot of Democrats out there would agree that's what we want. When you hear Democrat politicians talk about it, they talk about, here's this wish list of, rulings we want to get a certain result in. And to some extent, conservative politicians can fall into that trap as well, as seeing the justices of the Supreme Court is kind of 9 fairy godmothers who are going to give me what I want. Right. We would all we'd all like to see the policies we think are going to be good for America enacted, but we have to remember that has to happen through a legitimate process. And in the case of, we have a constitution that says laws are passed by the elected representatives of the American people. That's Congress, signed by the president. And the justices of the Supreme Court are there just to make sure those laws are faithfully interpreted and that the Constitution itself is faithfully interpreted. So we need justices who are going to be vigorous in defending the rights that are in the Constitution, but of course, not inventing rights that are not in the Constitution, like we saw with the Roe v. Wade decision. And like, unfortunately, there is a temptation of many justices to say, hey, this thing, I know this thing is so good. And, sometimes we disagree about which things are good, but okay, apart from even that, they want to do something they think is good, but they say, well, the Constitution, I'm just going to read this into it, basically. I'm going to make it part of American law rather than doing it the legitimate way, which is let's take that to the American people. And as a judge, on the flip side, your job is to enforce those laws, even when you think they're really poorly written or poorly, bad policy in those laws. They have to make sure they recognize the role to which they took an oath is to uphold those laws as they're passed. And then hopefully, those of us who are out there advocating in the political sphere can try to get politicians who will pass laws that have the better policies. But it's the judges need to be very careful to keep to their constitutional role. And ultimately, that is what's going to ensure a country that's grounded on freedom and that's grounded on democracy like ours is.
Yeah. Tim, when you think about this, we've talked about this before, too, that it seems like a lot of these issues, everyone wants them to be federalized. Everyone wants them to, they want one thing coming out of D.C. that's going to solve all these problems. And maybe that's the pressure on these judges that maybe if we just leave 9 people to figure it out, they'll come up with some solution. But that's not their role, right? And we've got to teach people that it's our responsibility to get involved in these issues. And maybe that's even at the state level or the local level. What do you think?
Yes, I totally agree. And I must say, every time I'm in the presence of Carrie Severino, I kind of scratch my head and wonder why she's not one of the 9.
Right.
She's so extraordinary. And may I say, to the second point that she raised, Greg and Carrie, we're going to test this proposition pretty quickly. We know that the president now has begun the formal interview process for his potential picks. As you know, I worked at the White House for nearly 8 years through 3 Supreme Court nominations. And this process can be a bit of a slog. The list of contenders or potential nominees is very interesting. All of them, the top ones, are 55 years of age or under. And when you consider the fact that Stephen Breyer is 83, not leaving the court until the end of the term, you realize that we are looking at someone on the court who potentially can be there a very long time. Right. Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson is only 51 years old. She's a judge on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. For those who don't know, it's often seen as the most influential of all of the appellate courts. Leandra Kruger, who is only 45. She's a justice on the California Supreme Court. And then, of course, Judge Juliana Michelle Childs. She's 55, the oldest of the 3 top contenders, but gosh, only 55. And she's a federal judge from South Carolina. So I would say, both Greg and Carrie, that this is going to be a very important, fascinating process to watch. And applying the rubric that Carrie talks about, the largest question is, will a potential nominee really understand not what they perceive to be their role, but what their role actually is? And as Carrie said so eloquently, it is not to sign the laws or make the laws. It's something quite different. And I think that we all agree as constitutionalists, this is the largest historical question we're facing in this nomination.
Well, let's just jump back to you, Carrie. Then what are the dynamics of this process? Because, isn't it the president's job and opportunity to just go ahead and nominate who he wishes? And how come the Senate, has taken such a more powerful role in this? Because I remember all the way back to Judge Bork. I mean, that's where I go back to. And then I also think about Clarence Thomas. What happened to Clarence Thomas? No one seems to talk about representation when they talk about him. I go back to those processes and I thought, how these guys were actually now determining who these people were to be. And I just didn't understand their criteria. So take us inside that process a little bit more so that our people can understand.
Yeah. So the idea, originally behind having the Senate confirm a nominee that the president picked is to kind of give them some sort of accountability, make sure the president's not just, nominating nepotistic kind of nominations where my cousin will go on the Supreme Court and then, picking people just for himself. That means that the Senate has a check on the president. That's a lot of authority to pick the nominee, but it still has to be someone the Senate can make sure is really well qualified and well suited for the position. For a lot of American history, not all of it, but most of it coming up until the time you're talking about with Bork, it was a process that the Senate was largely fairly deferential to the president. So, there were definitely contentious nominations in there, but most of the time they were not as contentious, and particularly when you got below the Supreme Court level. But if there was controversy, it'd come out at the Supreme Court level. But most people did get confirmed nonetheless, with rare exceptions. Once you get to the Bork era, and this is where Reagan really started turning things around. Obviously, before that, he had nominated Antonin Scalia, who was an incredibly strong conservative, but it was with Bork that we saw things change particularly. And the big shift happened because between Scalia and Bork, the Senate switched hands. It went from Republican-controlled Senate to a Democrat-controlled Senate. And for the first time, really, the Democrats decided to say, hey, wait a minute, we don't have to confirm the president's nominee. There's nothing, we could actually stop this nominee because now we have majority control in the Senate. And guess who was leading the Senate Judiciary Committee, helping lead this charge against Robert Bork, creating the first, huge catastrophic nomination failure. It was there were ads being run for hundreds of thousands of dollars. People were shocked that this happened. There's a verb, borking someone is to have this sort of underhanded personal campaign against them. Well, guess who? It was Joe Biden, right? Joe Biden was head of the Judiciary Committee when that all happened. And that really marked a turning point in American politics. Now, for a long time, particularly the Republicans kept on trying to go back and go, wow, let's not go down that road again. Let's keep on trying to be as even-handed and as easygoing as we can on the Democrats, because we don't want to go down this road. What we've learned, unfortunately, is there's no unringing that bell. There is no way to go back to the old system. And we learned it in spades with Clarence Thomas's nomination.
Exactly.
Guess who was chairing the Judiciary Committee during Clarence Thomas's confirmation?
Joe Biden,
the same guy who's, I know, it's like, he keeps coming back, right? It's the same guy who's going to be asking all of us to be, nice and calm. And of course, his nominees are all going to be wonderful. And why would you exert serious scrutiny on his nominees? Well, let me tell you, sir, the kind of underhanded smear campaigns that you ran against Republican nominees, and that the ringleader of the judicial nomination circus is now the one appointing this judge. Now, amazing. I am not advocating we ever should go down that road. We have to maintain the high ground here in terms of we should never attack a nominee based on his or her, a personal smear campaign kind of things. However, I do think we always need to be recognizing, given the importance of this position, that we do need to show real scrutiny of a nominee's beliefs and judicial philosophy. That always should be fair game. And you can have hardball questions that are still kind and respectful of the human being on the other side of the table. And I think that's what I hope the Senate engages in this process, because I'm really concerned about a party that has gone really all in on judicial activism in the form of, as Justice Breyer really used to eloquently argue for, this living Constitution. The idea that the Constitution evolves and that the judges, that 9 unelected men and women on this court get to be the sort of Delphic oracle to tell us what the Constitution says today, when we as the American people should be the ones who we're the ones who ratified the Constitution originally, and under the proper amendment process, we're the ones who get to amend it, not unelected judges. And even Biden himself said recently, I want to nominate someone who's going to enforce the unenumerated rights in the Constitution. So remember, the Constitution enumerates a lot of rights. We have the Bill of Rights that says what our rights are. What are the unenumerated rights? Those are the ones that literally are not in the Constitution. So this is an important debate, that this is an opportunity for our country to have. Not everyone gets involved in the sort of lower court nominations, but this is a chance to look front and center and say, hey, do you want judges who are just pulling out of the ether what they think our rights should be? Or do you want judges who recognize that they take an oath to uphold the Constitution and the law of the country? And the Constitution doesn't just mean a blank slate that you can import whatever your beliefs are into. There's actual words. There's a text. There's a document. It's there.
Yes.
So anyway, that's what I think this is going to be a chance to discuss. And I hope that we keep the idea of not just nominating as a rubber stamp every judge, because I think that was probably the wrong approach too. But we have to also do it in a civil way where we can have that debate in a proper fashion.
Well,
I pick up on that really quickly, Greg, because I think it's such an eloquent point. God rest her memory, and I really do mean this. But this is one of the ironies of the late Justice Ginsburg. She was on the court for a very long time. She lived to be quite old, but she never really understood her constitutional role. It was not to make law. It was not to be clever. It was not to seek, the front edge of the living Constitution, as Carrie has said. And by the way, Carrie's book is exceptional, and I strongly recommend it. And to the other point that she was making, and Greg, the embedded in the question you were asking, is another really remarkable book, which I strongly recommend, called Clarence Thomas and the Lost Constitution by Myron Magnet. I think
excellent book.
Perhaps, yes, I think it's the best, and it's small. I mean, it's relatively short, but it packs a punch, and it goes directly to the point that you were asking about and that Carrie was making so well. What is the Lost Constitution? The Lost Constitution is a relatively short document that is written with unflinching clarity and which is really easy to understand. The Lost Constitution, so-called, has the words have a fixed meaning. It's timeless. And the beautiful genius of the Constitution, perhaps America's greatest contribution to Western civilization, is that average men and women, can read and understand it. And I think that going in to this nomination process, and the president and the White House are buzzing about the fact that they want to make this nomination, before he comes here to Capitol Hill on March 1st for his State of the Union message. Of course, there's all kinds of reasons that this administration would want to put a nominee front and center in that speech over against so much else that's going on in our nation and country. And I think for that reason, in part, it's important that we not lose the overarching narrative of our dialogue today, which is this is front and center about the Constitution and about one of nine going forward. I think this is really, frankly, as big as it gets.
Well, and I think, again, people need to understand. That's why I said the narrative. If we keep changing the process, then we need to understand the underlying narrative that's proper. And then the narrative is that this is to limit government, so that you can have individual freedom and you can actually make your own way. And to give all this power over to 9 justices is the exact opposite of the American experiment. I mean, we've got an amendment process. If you want to amend the Constitution, there is a process for that. So again, I don't understand why people, even when we vote, I was very frustrated. And this maybe goes to the heart of the matter. I'm very frustrated at the basic level, where I look for a judge and it doesn't give me any information about his politics, nothing about his stance on issues, nothing about his judicial philosophy. And yet I'm supposed to just say he's competent, he's not competent, put him on the bench, in our local area. Well, if they're going to become activists, I want to know about that information. And so again, you talked about how the process is changing, but actually we're still using the old ways at the levels where we have some control. Carrie, I mean, so again, help us out. I mean, how are we supposed to fight back on some of this stuff?
Yeah, it does make it really difficult. And Justice Scalia talked about how when you have an approach to the court where the judge gets to kind of add content to the law, when it's not just the legislature, then suddenly it turns the judges into much more political actors. So then he said, you shouldn't have to, in a judicial nomination process, know, well, where do you stand on this issue? Where do you stand on this issue? Do you personally like this or that? And no, I shouldn't have to know those things.
Right.
But if the judge is going to be a politician, suddenly that does become relevant. And then suddenly I do have to know, all right, what is your stance on life issues? What's your stance on guns? What's your stance on limited government? What's your stance? Yeah. So all of those things shouldn't be our focus. And as much as people get frustrated by the having parties involved in judicial elections where, different states where sometimes judges are elected, that actually can provide a helpful proxy, at least for people who are trying to figure out, okay, what is this judge's approach? Because thankfully, at least we have one party that has committed itself to a vision of judging that would say, let's stick with the written text of the Constitution, the written law. And I would hope, again, I think this is something that should be appealing to people on both sides of the aisle. So this is something that might be an opportunity to talk with your friends who are on the other side of the aisle and say, hey, we might not agree what the best policies are to solve this problem or that problem, but at least we should agree that that is something for the American people and not for the judges to then do an end run around the democratic process.
Absolutely. And before, I know you have to run, Tim, you were actually knee deep in this because you knew Kavanaugh really well. Do you anticipate that kind of process with this nominee? Where, I mean, that was wild. I mean, that was a wild process. I was there too. I was seeing the protests, the orchestrated protests on the Hill and these kind of things. And I thought, have we sunk to this where a really good guy, is going to be smeared like this? Is this the way it's going to be? And all of us would probably say, I don't think this is going to happen with Biden's nominees. Doesn't that say something about us as a people?
Yeah, I think it does. Justice Kavanaugh is a person of impeccable character and integrity. He is a genuinely gifted jurist. And for anyone who paid attention to the content and the substance of those hearings, they know that that the American people have a remarkable justice in Justice Kavanaugh. As Carrie said, and as you intimated a moment ago, arising like a phoenix, from the Bork years, and in many ways carried over into the Thomas, hearings. This is really a nadir, the lowest possible way that we should ever consider any potential nominee. And I feel very confident, genuinely confident, that the members of the Senate Judiciary Committee, the ranking member, Mr. Grassley, and so many others, I think, regardless of how they may disagree on judicial philosophy or other matters that may come out, I think a sense of magnanimity and civility will prevail. And I think that it's always perfectly acceptable to criticize the ideas, even if you're not criticizing the person. And I think that this was animated so beautifully in the friendship for years between the late Justices Ginsburg and Scalia. And in fact, Justice Ginsburg said this in her incredibly eloquent and tender eulogy of her friend Justice Scalia, where she said in part that the elasticity of their very long, decades-long friendship was that they may have attacked each other's ideas, but they didn't attack each other's person or character. And I think that is very befitting of the Supreme Court, even if we disagree on the big ideas.
Okay. And Carrie, just to close this out then, let's talk about a couple of the ideas, because as far as I can tell from Judge Michelle Childs, the issue for me is again, she was front and center with the Obergefell basically ruling, because she was one of the first judges where this was litigated in her court. And then Leandra Kruger aggressively against the Hosanna Tabor ruling, which I think shocked all the judges when she came out as arguing against religious liberty, in that particular thing. These are real issues that we should be concerned about, correct?
Oh, absolutely. I think those are, and Judge Child also has a concerning case regarding witnesses for absentee ballots and invalidating that in the state of California. Judge Jackson has some concerning cases where she seems to have taken very political positions opposed to the Trump administration and reached out to decide decisions against his regulatory actions that she didn't even have jurisdiction to do. And that was even liberal judges of the DC Circuit arguing that actually she didn't have authority to decide those cases. I am concerned to make sure that the Senate Judiciary Committee members, as we're vetting these nominees and as they have their hearings, that there is a serious delving into their approach to the law. What we've seen from Biden's nominees so far is they like to go up and say, oh, well, I'm perfectly moderate and down the middle of the road. And of course, I recognize how to read the Constitution and what it says. But do you have examples in your judging before where you can show that you actually do apply those things? I think now this is more of an illustration than anything. I mean, we have the fact that we have a majority justices in the court who are originalists right now. And the fact that every judge, even the Democrat nominees, have to go up before the court and at least verbally say they understand originalism is a testament to where we've come. Because I think everyone recognizes that is the principled way to approach the Constitution. So we have to at least give lip service to that. What we need to do is ensure that there's a way to show that the people really have applied that in their judicial lives so far. Again, it's a concern with judges, like Judge Kruger or Justice California Supreme Court Justice Kruger, who basically disavowed First Amendment protections to that Lutheran school in the Hosanna Tabor case. It's a concern in those cases. It's a concern for me for Judge Jackson, who at her confirmation process to the DC Circuit claimed she didn't really have an approach to interpreting the Constitution. So I would have been embarrassed to say that as a 3L in law school. And here she is coming to the second highest court in the land and still doesn't really have isn't able to articulate a clear approach to the Constitution. Either she's being correct and candid in saying that, and that's concerning, or she's simply trying to not disclose what her real interpretive philosophy is. And I fear that any nominee that this president is going to select is going to be someone who, much like many of his other policies, will be presented as moderate, but at the end of the day, is actually going to be embracing some of the most extreme liberal policies. We know that's the direction his administration is pushed. We know that's the direction they're being pushed by the dark money groups on the left that have spent hundreds of millions of dollars to get him elected and other Democrats elected this past season. And so that's where the pressure is. So I think we need to be very careful to vet these justices fully. And, the reality is there's only the Senate is a 50-50 vote right now. So if every Democrat nominee, green lights these judges, whoever the president picks would be confirmed in that case. But we can't waste the opportunity to talk about this, to make sure the American people realize what is happening, and to make sure that those senators on both parties who are greenlighting a nominee that doesn't have a sound judicial philosophy are held accountable.
That's an excellent, and let's just leave with that thought, because in every interview most people have gone through interview process, and people will say they're not asked just what do you think about this or that. They're asked to demonstrate how they have done this in the past. Show us how you've solved this issue, or show us what principles have you brought to bear on this. And one of the things I talk to people about is when Prop 8 was overturned in California, and it was 75% African Americans and 75% Hispanics voted for it. It was a judicial usurpation of the individual's vote. And I said, nothing like that happened in Jim Crow to that degree. And yet nobody made a big deal about that because it was kind of the liberal way of doing things. And the Ninth Circuit Court just did it capriciously. And that's really our issue. Our issue is they didn't have the right to do that. They did not have the right to vacate the votes of Blacks and Hispanics who happen to believe that marriage was between a man and a woman. And I think that's what you're talking about is let's talk about their rulings. Let's see how they have applied these things in the past. So thank you both, for being with us today, because this is about people's individual freedoms. It's about making sure that the judiciary doesn't align with the executive branch or the legislative branch, but that they maintain their uniqueness so that our individual liberties can actually be protected. Well, thank you again. Thanks, Carrie, for being with us today. It's a pleasure to have gotten to know you a little bit more. And thanks for your expertise on this. And thank you, Tim, for sharing your perspective as well. Thanks for tuning in today. To get to know our LCRL DC work better, check out our website at lcrlfreedom.org. Contained there are resources to empower your public square dynamic discipleship. Or check out our weekly Word from the Center opinion piece every Friday at facebook.com/LCRL Freedom. Till next time, God bless you always. I'm Gregory Seltz. Have a great week.
You've been listening to Liberty Alert with Dr. Gregory Seltz, Executive Director of the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty in Washington, D.C. This program has been brought to you by the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty.